chair a congressional investigation into the acts of terrorism in New York City and at the Pentagon. We're joined by Jane Harman, Democrat from California. Good morning. Thanks for being with us,
Good morning.
And Saxby Chambliss, Republican from Georgia. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
What's your mission?
Well, Steve, our mission is to focus from a House perspective on the incident that occurred on September the 11th, as well as to focus in on international terrorism and homeland security. We're going to do this in a very bipartisan way, as everything has been done over the last week or so. And the Speaker wants to make sure that from a legislative perspective that all of our intelligence gathering sources have the right tools with which to work. Our law enforcement agencies have all the tools they need to enforce the laws with respect to terrorism. And then with respect to the incident that occurred last week, we're going to do not a criminal investigation, but a fact-gathering investigation of what did happen. Were there any deficiencies that we, from a legislative perspective, need to be working on? And if so, then it's our job to make recommendations back to the Speaker, and we're going to do that probably within the next several months.
As you know, there have been past commissions, and to put it bluntly, many of them have just been collecting dust. What will make this any different from what we've seen in the past?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I served on one of them, the Commission on Terrorism, which made some recommendations to Congress last year, which I think we now will have the political will to follow up on. The important thing here, I believe, in addition to finding out who did these deeds last week and punishing them appropriately, is going forward to prevent this from ever happening again. And to do that, we really have to reorganize some of the ways we gather intelligence to make certain that we have what we need to protect against 21st century threats, which are very different from 20th century threats.
Our phone lines are open. The number's on the bottom of your screen. Remember, our area code is 202 here in Washington. We're joined by two members of the House of Representatives, Saxby Chambliss of Georgia and Jane Harman of California. How will you go about reaching your conclusions? What's the process involved in doing an investigation into this?
Well, as Saxby said, we are very bipartisan. He and I have been together on many of these talk shows. We were together in New York yesterday visiting Ground Zero. We were together last week at the Pentagon. The Speaker and the Minority Leader together will hold a press conference today talking about our plan for hearings. But the bottom line is we're prepared to take a bold look at how we gather intelligence and what changes we need to make to be absolutely certain we'll have the information ahead of time next time.
Who do you want to talk to?
Well, we're going to talk to any number of folks. There are a number of experts in the field of terrorism. There are a number of experts in the field of bioterrorism, for example, agroterrorism, eco-terrorism. There are any number of specialists out there. We're going to have to filter through those folks and find out who the folks that really know what's going on with respect to the terrorism issue are. Another phase of our investigation is going to focus on how prepared the United States is for an attack. We've got a great example now in New York, unfortunately. Even though we knew that New York City was probably the best prepared city of any city in the country, and we planned to hold a hearing up there. Jane and I had already set a hearing for October the 29th with Mayor Giuliani as our host. Another aspect of our investigation is going to be our response capability. Again, New York, we knew, was the best responder from a capability standpoint, and we don't know whether we're going to move forward with that particular hearing, but we will be holding hearings on all three aspects of threat, preparedness, as well as response to this incident, as well as to all other instances.
Akron, Ohio, you're on C-SPAN. Good morning.
Yes, I was wondering if the Intelligence Oversight Committees hamstring the intelligence agencies. That's all I have. Thank you.
Well, the answer to that is no. The Intelligence Committee does have a duty of oversight of our intelligence agencies, and we do that very carefully, not really covertly, but kind of behind the scenes, because we don't want to do oversight in a public perspective that will allow the bad guys out there that we're looking at to know exactly what our intelligence sources are doing. But we have an obligation, first of all, to set the budget for those folks, as well as to look at exactly how they're gathering information, what their needs are, and how they use the weapon systems that we give them. So, no, I don't think we hamstring them. It's our goal here, for example, to work directly with the CIA and the FBI hand in hand to make sure that they do have all the tools that they need.
Let me, if I might, add something to that. Some very good people work in our intelligence agencies, and we have the highest regard for them. Later today, we're hoping, if the congressional schedule permits, to go over to the CIA to thank people who have been working 24/7 to protect us. The problem is the organization of the intelligence function meets last century's threats. The same is true in the Defense Department. It is time to be bold. It is time to develop a seamless system so that we don't have agencies, sub-agencies in the intelligence area competing with each other for resources and people, but they all work together. The goal is to get the information, analyze the information, act on the information in advance so that there's absolutely no possibility that we're surprised again.
Both of our guests co-chairing a House committee looking into New York City, the Pentagon, and other acts of terrorism in this country with recommendations on how to prevent it in the future. Next is Anderson, South Carolina. Good morning. You're on C-SPAN.
Good morning.
Morning.
My question is for the Congresswoman from California. It seems like the Intelligence Committee is really being a scapegoat here. Regardless where people believe it or not and are going to have to deal with it, you're still going to have to deal with your open borders.
As somebody from California, how do you deal with that in Mexico or in Canada?
Not so well. Immigration is a very tough issue. It's been a tough issue for years, and as someone who represents a state, with a big border with Mexico, I'm very well aware of it. There is no idea out there to shut down our borders. I'm the daughter of immigrants. I don't know what Saxby's roots are, but I think most of us in this country are. But there has to be a way, and I will support a way, to monitor better who's getting into this country and who's overstaying visas in this country. We know now from the preliminary information about these hijackers, and we're going to find a broader circle of folks who worked on last week's events, that many of them were not here legally. If we can track people better, mindful of civil liberties, we can protect our security better, and we have to do this. We have to reset the balance. The balance is not going to go all the way one way, no civil liberties, but we have to reset it so that we protect security, the security threats, protect against the security threats of the 21st century, and we protect civil liberties.
Let me just add to that we've got to have a better dialogue between our federal agencies. INS, for example, does a decent job with the tools they have and the resources they have of monitoring our borders, but when bad guys come in, INS needs to get that information in the hands of the right people. And sometimes that probably doesn't happen, and you can understand with the bureaucracies that we have. But we're charged with the responsibility of trying to coordinate that, try to get that scope of dialogue narrowed down to make sure that these agencies do dialogue with each other and share information.
Los Angeles, good morning.
Yes, I was calling because I was going to discuss the borders. I think that has a lot to do with it. We let all these, well, we don't let them, all these illegal immigrants come into our country. Then we turn around and then we give them amnesty. We have these amnesty programs. We're not monitoring the borders like we should. We should have the military on the borders, because I live in Los Angeles and we have so many illegal immigrants in Los Angeles. It's ridiculous.
Thanks, caller.
Well, let me respond. First of all, you're up very early. That's very impressive. As I just said in response to the last caller, illegal immigration is a big problem, and we still need to work on it. As Saxby Chambliss just said, the INS is an agency that tries to do a good job. One of the big problems is sharing information. We do need more federal resources applied to this problem. We also need more federal support, in my view, for states like California, Texas, and Florida that are disproportionately hit by the costs of illegal immigration. I am not an advocate for a blanket amnesty for people in this country. I don't support that. I may support something the president is talking about, which is a kind of earned legalization for people who've worked here and paid taxes here. But nonetheless, Nevertheless, the circumstances around terrorism involve a few folks who have come here really specifically to cause us harm, and we need to use better tools, and we are, to track where they are, to make sure that if they've overstayed visas or even if they're suspected of committing terrorist acts, that we're able to talk to them and detain them. And these are new proposals on the table, and assuming that they are consistent with protecting the civil liberties of law-abiding citizens, I think there's going to be enormous support for those new proposals.
We've had a number of international viewers tuning in over the last week and a half. Our next call is from Western Australia. Go ahead, please.
Yes. My question is, how, with everything that's in motion now, how are you going to manage to stay in line with your own Constitution?
Well, that is an excellent question. You know, there's oftentimes the feeling that you ought to immediately react to a terrible situation that occurs like this, and we do need to react. And the thing that makes me feel good about this administration is that this president is surrounded by the best people in the world with respect to military ideas and from a defense perspective as to what we ought to do. He's surrounded by good people from a judicial perspective as to what we ought to do. And we have not had that knee-jerk reaction. We're thinking through this from an administration level. And we're going to do the right thing, be it retaliate or be it put into place new laws that give better and more tools to our law enforcement officers. And at the same time, we are going to be mindful that we live under the greatest Constitution in the world. And a document that has survived and worked for 225 years is not something that we can afford to mess with. So that's why your question is a critical question, and one that Jane and myself, as well as every other member of Congress, has got to continue to be mindful of as we go through this process, both of recommending legislation as well as carrying out the details of that legislation.
Jane Harman represents a portion of Los Angeles, a Democratic representative from California, and Saxby Chambliss, a Republican from Georgia, represents the 8th District, which includes Macon. Next call is Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Good morning.
Yes, I'd like to ask your guest this question. I was thinking that this terrorist activity, I can think back even into the Reagan years whenever hundreds of our military personnel died in a bombing attack over in the Middle East. Is there any possibility that these organizations have tapped into our government some way, getting intelligence like an Aldrich Ames or Robert Hansen or something like that? And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Thanks, caller. Representative Harman?
I think the people who work in our government are patriots, and they are on this case 24/7. It is true that there have been terrorist attacks over the recent years against U.S. people abroad, really, until last Tuesday. And it is also true that there have, unfortunately, been a few people in the CIA and the FBI who have been uncovered as disloyal to our country. But I think the answer to you, as firmly as I can make it, is that with very few exceptions, the people who work in our intelligence agencies and our law enforcement agencies are patriotic Americans. These foreign terrorists are capable of putting together, as we've seen, very carefully planned and effective attacks against us. And now the goal is to marshal all the talent we have in our government and to hope that Congress will be bold in helping to reorganize some of that talent to fight what's called the second wave, and I'm confident that we can do it.
Is there a name for this committee?
Yes, it's the Subcommittee on International Terrorism and Homeland Security.
Next call is Eugene, Oregon. Go ahead, please.
Hello, this is William from Eugene.
Hello, William.
Yeah, I'd like to offer a prayer. Not a prayer, but a Bible verse that is appropriate for this occasion. There's a verse in Psalms 127 that says, "Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain." You know, calling upon the Lord, as so many across the nation have done, is going to be a big help in in this whole affair. And also, I'd like to make a suggestion for home defense. It seems that in the near future, a wise move for the U.S. government to make is to institute a national draft for the purpose of national home defense. You know, the young people who would be drafted could participate in airport security and securing the nation's borders and other upcoming needs. And this would also bring the young people into this battle that we're going to have for a long, long time.
Thanks, caller.
Thanks, William. Well, let me just say that we appreciate the thoughts and prayers of every American, the support that both Jane and I individually have received, as well as other members of Congress, has been overwhelming. And we need your thoughts. We need your prayers as we go through this very difficult time. I made a comment on a national radio show I did this morning that I wish every American would pick up the phone and call their congressman, call their United States senators, and tell them that they are in their prayers and say a prayer for us each and every day, because this is a tough, tough area we're dealing with.
Let me just add to that. I really appreciate the way you asked that question, William. It was gentle and it was thoughtful and it was very important, especially as you target younger people. I'm a mother of 4 kids from age 16 to 28, and my teenagers, 2 of them, have been very concerned about this, and I think it would be a wonderful thing to challenge that concern into productive roles, whether they're on the military side, or they are, helping in the blood banks, or they are rounding up, running a food drive, or whatever it might be. I think that generation has to get into this, because it's that generation that we're trying to protect and that will have to keep our world strong for a long time. I just wanted to tell you something that we learned yesterday when we were at the site in New York City, which is a hugely emotional experience. It's something I would only recommend that your viewers undertake if they are prepared for it. But at any rate, the volunteers in New York are doing incredible things. They have, here's a picture of them, I think, right over here. The chefs who are out of business in lower Manhattan because all the restaurants are closed are going up to restaurants in Midtown and preparing exceptional meals to bring down to feed to the first responders who are still working at the site. There are veterinarians down there providing free services because so many pets have been hurt. There are massage therapists down there trying to relieve the stress of the folks who are trying to extract tons of material from these huge pits where we all know, human lives were extinguished last Tuesday. All of this response, I think, is just so hopeful and helpful, and I just want to congratulate America on its courage and commitment and compassion.
Saxby Chambliss, your impressions of what you saw in what is now a new term in this country, Ground Zero.
Jane's exactly right. It was a very emotional experience. We were able to go down and get fairly close to the World Trade Center, or what's left of it. We're in, about 100 yards of it, I guess, and we're right in the midst of all the responders, and it's obviously a pile of rubble, looks like a war zone. That we were prepared for, but you can never be prepared for the conversations that you hear from the rescuers, the signs of rescue operations that are ongoing, the morgue that sits there. It was a very emotional day yesterday, but Jane's right. Boy, those folks in New York have stepped forward like true Americans, and under Mayor Giuliani's leadership, every aspect of that mission that's ongoing over there now is working as a seamless team. And those folks are doing a terrific job, and it was nice to be able, particularly as a former firefighter. My first job was as a firefighter in Thomasville, Georgia, and to be able to shake the hand of a number of those firefighters who have had a very difficult and very emotional week, who know that they have some colleagues at the bottom of that pile somewhere, was a great experience for me.
Next call as we look at some more photographs from the area. Barstow, California, good morning.
Good morning. I'm a chef for Amtrak, and I think it's been demonstrated in this last week that we need viable options other than the airlines, considering their inherent vulnerability. And I was wondering if the Congress might consider upping Amtrak's subsidy so that they might be a backup for any such disaster like this in the future.
Thanks, caller.
What a timely call. We took Amtrak yesterday from Washington to New York and back. It turns out that right now, with National Airport being closed and the appropriately long lead times it takes to get on airplanes, that Amtrak was our better option. I would make two comments. First of all, I think we need to look at rail security. It was easy for us yesterday, and we also had appropriate escorts. But I'm concerned that most folks traveling on rail are not checked at all. It occurs to me that there are some real security risks with that, not just for rail passengers, but for urban passengers if something should happen in a train station under a big urban center like New York or Union Station in Washington or elsewhere. With respect to subsidies, we do absolutely now need to make sure that our critical infrastructure, which includes rail, is strong and is protected and is useful to move Americans around. If we give up our way of life, if we all now hide under our beds, our metaphorical beds, the terrorists win. That's not what we should do. We should never waive our Constitution, and we should never, never, ever retreat to a bunker mentality in this country.
Next, from Paragould, Arkansas, you're on C-SPAN. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I noticed you got a lot of questions put to you this morning and everything, and it's bouncing around different subjects. I was going to throw one more in at you. On the issue of wiretapping, I can't see where the American people would object to that unless they were doing something wrong. But am I too far off there, or what?
Well, there are going to be some changes in the tools that our law enforcement agencies have with respect to gathering intelligence, in addition to the tools that our surveillance folks like the CIA have as far as gathering intelligence. Whether we expand the wiretapping rights that they currently have or not, I don't know, but I can assure you it's going to be discussed. There is a package that the Attorney General is putting together kind of as we speak. I think Jane and I will probably see it today. And that package will probably be on the House floor within the next few days. There, in all probability, is going to be some expansion of the current wiretapping law, and we will look at that and make sure, number one, I have no doubt but if it's sent over to us, it certainly will be within the bounds of our Constitution, but we've got to make sure that it is, because innocent people can be harmed by this, and while I know we've got to make sure that we're able to monitor these bad guys on a regular basis, we got to really be able to do it within the bounds of our Constitution. But expansion of wiretapping is probably going to be a very debated, hotly debated subject.
A viewer from Seaside, California, Congresswoman Harman, says, please ask your guest why it is that people in the EU closest to the Mideast countries with more open borders have less fear about terrorism than we do.
Well, I'm not sure they have less fear. Let me add to this wiretap answer, too. But NATO has stepped up to say that the Mutual Defense Pact, and most of the EU countries are in NATO, will now apply. I think Europe is very worried, and legitimately so, about attacks, something like the attack against us. What is perhaps a difference is the hatred of some of these extremist groups. And let's remember that most Arab Americans, and certainly most of the folks in the Muslim faith, are law-abiding people all over the world. This is a small extremist faction that is acting against us because they hate our beliefs, and so they would target us more likely than Europe. But I think Europe is exposed, and I think many Europeans are concerned about this. On wiretapping, the point I wanted to make is, yes, we have to. I agree totally with Saxby. Retain our constitutional protections. But the expansions the Attorney General is asking for, by my lights, and I'm a Democrat, seem to make sense. The wiretap laws right now give you permission, once you go through a court process, to tap a certain telephone number that belongs to an individual. What's wrong with that is we all know we can get cheap cell phones, throw them in the trash can, and get another cheap cell phone. So if you get a wiretap for one telephone number and that phone is thrown away, and then this terrorist suspect has another telephone number, you can't track him. The change that's being asked for is to get the court permission tied to the individual. So if the individual uses a series of cell phones or a Palm Pilot or a BlackBerry or a computer to communicate, all of those communication forms are fair game. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about a digital capacity in our intelligence capability to meet a digital threat in the 21st century.
Jane Harman, Democrat from California, Saxby Chambliss, Republican from Georgia, both members of the House of Representatives and both co-chairing a new House committee looking at terrorism. Next call comes to us from Meade, Oklahoma. You're on C-SPAN. Go ahead. Caller, good morning. Meade, Oklahoma?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Yes. I've, been sitting here since this all started, and I've been listening about whose fault, who failed, who didn't have the money to do their job. And I own a car, and I have an insurance policy, and it says if I leave the keys in the car and the car is stolen, I'm responsible for it. And we've got less than 600 people sitting up there running this government that left the keys in the car, and they all ought to resign or be charged with derelict of duty, because we don't need bicycle trails and more parks. We need our country to be secure, safe for our children, and you people went to sleep and left the key in the car. You can't pass it down to my children, people that worked under you, or nothing else. You're the people that have the committees. You're the people that talk everything to death and do absolutely nothing, and you should all resign.
Thanks, caller. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'll say something. We all stand for election in the House every 2 years, and our constituents have a perfect right to throw us out if they don't think we're doing the job. I would say to that caller that he's partly right. We all need to be doing more, and we all need to be working together to get it done. But he's also partly wrong. These terrorist threats in the 21st century are asymmetric. They come where you least expect them. And unless we're going to build an armed fortress in this country, which I do not support, unless we're going to repeal our Constitution, which I do not support, we need to have a careful balance. We need to have people bold to implement that careful balance. That's what we're working for. And I want to say I support the people in our intelligence agencies who are fighting to keep us safe.
Congressman Chambliss, another email from Chris Walker of Philadelphia, who says, what can we expect with regard to communications and internet freedom?
Well, I don't see any restrictions that we're going to be that we are going to put on the internet at this point in time. Certainly, we do know that there are terrorist groups around the world who have used the internet extensively. They have used it from the standpoint of sending coded messages. We're able to intercept a lot of those messages, and we have some encryption problems. I don't know that you could call it a deficiency, but anytime you intercept a message, you attempt to decode that message, and this goes all the way back to the very first war that was ever fought in this country. We've always had a difficulty with decoding those messages, but we've got to continue from a federal perspective, from an intelligence gathering perspective, to monitor the internet from the standpoint of keeping our eye on the bad guys who are using the internet. But folks who use it on a day-to-day regular basis, I don't think we have any business interfering with their right to free and open use of the internet.
Next call is from Memphis. Good morning. You're on C-SPAN.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to check with y'all. Much has been made of our former president's search for his legacy, and we must wonder, really, if the time and effort and money and focus of attention that was spent on that has contributed to this attack here slipping through the crack. I would have felt a lot better if his legacy would have been that he had hunted down the first bombers of the World Trade Tower, the Khobar Towers, the embassy bomber over in Africa, and the USS Cole bombers. But he didn't. He seemed to be much more interested in covering up his own perjury and inappropriate behavior. And I just wanted to ask you all what your thought was as far as his focus of attention.
Well, let me just say I'm a Republican. I voted to impeach the last president, but I'm not going to sit here today and point fingers at him or anybody else with respect to what allowed the incident of September 11 to happen. I think there's enough blame to go around. What we've got to do, as Jane alluded to earlier, we've got to move forward. We've got to figure out what happened. We've got to figure out where our lapses were, where our deficiencies are, whether it is intelligence gathering, whether it's security at airports, at the borders, or where it is. That's what we've got to concentrate on and move forward. We've got an administration now that is absolutely, totally, 150% dedicated to eradicating terrorists from this world and making sure that every American can wake up every single day knowing that they're secure in their home and secure in their workplace. And it's critical from a legislative perspective that we lead into the future regarding where we're going in this area of eradication of terrorists.
Next call is from Seattle. Good morning.
Good morning. My question is we've seen on the different news organizations a lot of these people that are totally against fighting back in any way without going through the UN or some other thing. And my response to that would be, and I'd like to hear your response, is we've seen what one attack has done on this country. I mean, can we sustain another attack?
Well, that's a very theoretical question. Can we sustain it? Yes. Should we do everything we can to prevent it? Absolutely. As far as the response to this attack, I want to commend the president, who is speaking to us tonight about what he plans to do. And I have, you know, we'll all learn together, I believe, some of the things that he has decided to do. But I want to commend him for a very multi-layered response to this huge, horrific attack of last week. There's a piece that's diplomatic, as we are all learning. The Secretary of State and others are trying to build a global coalition of most of the states in the world, including moderate Arab countries, to fight terrorists and to fight those who harbor terrorists. That's one piece. Second piece is a military response, and we'll learn more about that tonight. I support a military response. The third piece, and that's Congress's responsibility, I believe, is to try to reorganize for the future. In the Intelligence Committee, we are the people who authorize the intelligence budget, and we have the ability, and we're planning to use it on a bipartisan basis, to organize our intelligence gathering capabilities so that in the future there won't be misses, and we will find out information, and we will be prepared to prevent attacks of the kind that we had last Tuesday.
Let me remind you, if you want to email us on any given morning, our email address is journal@cspan.org. A viewer from New York City, Donna Micah, says, given the massive layoffs taking place around the country both before and after the suicide attacks last week, how on God's earth can our president ask for and accept a 100% increase in his salary from $200,000 to $400,000 with an additional $50,000 in spending, which was approved by the House yesterday?
Well, what you have to remember is that our president has the most difficult job of any CEO in the world. And the salary that the president receives was not asked for by this president. We as members of Congress increased that salary in the last session. It did not take effect until the next president was elected. So this president really had nothing to do with that. It's just something that we got to compensate our folks in government adequately. Otherwise, they're all going to leave and go to the private sector. We've got to compete with the private sector, and increasing his salary was the right thing to do.
Montreal, Canada, you're next. Good morning.
Good morning. For Representative Harman, I'd like to ask or make 2 or 3 little suggestions, and the question is, how do these interfere with civil rights? Number one, pass a law today that anybody who's out of status, immigration INS status, face a felony charge that has a long prison term. Right now, they don't even go to jail. All they do is they have to leave the country, and that takes 6 months to a year to have a hearing. You can pass that law today, and that doesn't violate anybody's civil rights. You see, the difference between your parents who came here is they wanted to be Americans, and they wanted to learn the language, and they wanted to fit in. These people do not. Apparently, it's harder to get a massage therapy license or a beautician license than it is to take the FAA commercial pilot's license.
Well, point well taken. Let me just not quibble with your premise, because I agree with it, but quibble with your suggestion. Creating a huge number of new felonies in the country and trying to police that system and make it work, I think would be extremely difficult. Our court system is already overcrowded. But finding a way to target those suspected of terrorist acts or harboring terrorists who are out of status and taking swift action against them is what we have to do. And the Attorney General is talking about some ways to do it. We just need to be sure up here that those ways don't interfere with the civil liberties of law-abiding Americans. But you're right about our parents, and my parents particularly, both of whom are deceased. But my father was a refugee from Nazi Germany, and he came here with nothing in his 20s, and he learned English. And all my professional life, he died fairly recently, I got lectures about why can't other immigrant groups do this. And while I understand the hardships, I do think that we should be encouraging legal immigration. Diversity is part of our strength, but we need a much more focused and targeted way to make sure that those out of status and illegal are not harming our country.
San Diego, good morning.
Yes, I was just curious, if we're going to be going after these terrorists, what about the drug situation? Do you think that that has anything to do with terrorism in the United States as far as drugs coming into the country?
Thanks, caller. We're short on time. We'll get a response.
There's simply no question about the fact that there is a direct relationship between the drug trade in this country and really all over the world and the terrorist movement. We know for a fact that a number of terrorist organizations receive their main source of funding from illegal drug trade. Afghanistan, for example, is one of the largest producers of opium in the world, and that is kind of a hotbed for terrorism, as everyone today knows. So it's incumbent on us in our subcommittee to do some looking into this issue, the correlation between drug trade and terrorism, and again, if we can make recommendations with respect to legislation or provide tools to our law enforcement folks to do a better job of ridding this country and the world of illegal drug trade, then we're going to do that. But obviously that is a tough issue.
Last call for our two guests. Reedsville, Georgia, good morning.
Yes, I have a question for the entire panel. It's just the number of people that the airlines are having to discharge, and I hear that maybe the security of our airports is going under federal. Why can't they get these names and keep them and maybe glean from the ones that's discharged to put back work as security by retraining them?
I strongly agree with that. I've been calling for converting some of the personnel that the airlines have hired into federal marshals or appropriate government staff at the airports. I think people can be retrained. I think they need to be paid reasonably for the bigger assignments they're going to be asked to shoulder. In the short term, we need trained personnel policing our airports and policing our airplanes. I think any American traveler expects that, and that's something that Congress can deliver. But certainly my goal would be to give the people already working at airports the opportunity to fill a list of new jobs and be trained for those jobs.
Last question for both of you on a personal note. What's different last week versus this week as you enter the Capitol? Have you seen changes?
Oh, I think there are a number of things that are different. Number one, you don't see as many people. We have limited the Capitol tours. There are not as many tourists just purely in town as there were last week. We hope that improves because Washington is still a safe place. We're still under a high alert. We're going to remain under a high alert for a significant period of time. But we've seen heightened security there. I think, though, the most important thing that we've seen inside the Capitol over the last week is a change of attitude of members. Jane and I are not particularly partisan folks to start with, but all of America knows that Congress itself has been very partisan over the last several years. There's been a lot of wrangling back and forth between members of opposite parties. We have come together, and I want to commend our leadership on both sides of the aisle. Mr. Gephardt and Speaker Hastert have worked very closely together. They've encouraged us as members of the Republican Conference and the Democratic Caucus to come together and work together because of the emergency that we're under, and we've done that. And I think that's been very encouraging, and hopefully will spill over into the future with respect to the tough domestic issues that we're going to be facing.
I just totally second that. There's been more quiet conversation in Congress in the last week than in the last 10 years, and it's high time. The American people expect that of us. It's the only way we'll solve the big problems. We're all one family in this country, and I think this kind of show with callers shows that. People are thinking about the issues we're thinking about. Our children are thinking about the issues that we're thinking about, and it's time to solve the tough problems, keep our country safe, but protect our Constitution.
Congresswoman Jane Harman of California, Congressman Saxby Chambliss of Georgia, both co-chairs of a new committee looking at the acts of terrorism last week and recommendations for the future. We thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
We're going to let these two members of the House go on with their business. They have a meeting to go to at 10 o'clock, and we're going to show you some of the scenes over at the